All right, let's talk about one of the most mysterious and, let's be honest, one of the most feared countries on the planet, North Korea.
And that brings us to this really interesting question, doesn't it? You look at North Korea on a map and it's this pretty small country. So how can it possibly pose a real threat to a global superpower? Well, that's what we're going to dig into. Let's really unpack how they pull it off. So to really get a handle on the North Korea of today, we have to rewind the clock. You can't understand the present without looking at the past.
For a really long time, Korea was just Korea. One country, one people. But then in the 20th century, that all changed. A really brutal conflict basically ripped the peninsula in two, and that's how we ended up with a north and a south.
And that split wasn't just on paper. It was sealed in blood during a really devastating war that kicked off in 1950. The numbers are just staggering. South Korea alone lost more than 170,000 soldiers. That war drew a line in the sand, a permanent, painful one, and that division is still the defining feature of the region.
Okay, so with that history in mind, let's fast forward to today. At the very heart of North Korea's power structure, you've got one central figure, the leader, Kim Jong-un.
And when we say he's in charge, we mean he's really in charge. His grip on the country's entire administrative machine is just incredibly strong. Think about it. The government, the military, everything. It all reports back to him. It goes way beyond just being a leader. It's total, absolute command.
There's this quote that perfectly sums up their attitude. It's like they're saying, hey, this is our family's business. Why are you trying to be the uncle? It's this incredibly defiant stance against any kind of outside interference. Basically, thanks, but no thanks. We'll handle our own affairs.
But here's a crucial piece of the puzzle. They're not completely isolated. They have some very powerful friends. We're talking about Russia and China. For them, North Korea is a useful, let's call it a buffer. And having those two giants in their corner, that's what gives them the confidence to push back so hard against everyone else.
So that explains the political confidence. But what about the actual threat? What makes the world sit up and listen? Well, that's where we get to the really scary part. Their weapons.
Get this, 25,000 kilometers. That's the supposed range of their top-of-the-line missile. To put that in perspective, that's more than enough to hit Washington, D.C. all the way from North Korea. I mean, just let that sink in for a second.
And if you look at how they stack up against other countries, it's pretty eye-opening. Sure, places like Pakistan and Israel have nuclear capabilities, but their missiles? They're mostly designed for regional threats. North Korea has gone global with it. And here's the real kicker. Word is, their nuclear warheads are always attached to the missiles. They're basically ready to fly at a moment's notice.
And that right there, that changes everything. A ready-to-launch nuclear missile is the ultimate don't mess with me card. It's exactly why even a superpower like the US is so careful to avoid a direct fight. The risk is just too high.
Okay, so that's the outward-facing power, the big missiles, the global reach. But what's it like inside North Korea? How does the government keep such tight control over its own people? Well, it really boils down to one powerful emotion: fear.
There's this really stark analogy that gets the point across. In some countries, if you disagree with the government, they might try to update your software, change your way of thinking. But in North Korea, the approach is described as, well, they just shoot directly. It's incredibly brutal and leaves no room for debate.
And it's a system where the law just doesn't forgive. People live in constant fear of the leader. And the control is so complete, it gets into the most personal parts of your life. I mean, get this, you can't even choose your own hairstyle. You have to pick from a government-approved list. Think about that. It's a small thing, but it perfectly shows how the state controls absolutely everything.
All right, let's look at the final piece of this whole puzzle. How does a country like this even operate on the world stage? Who are its friends? Who are its enemies?
Believe it or not, they weren't always so cut off from the rest of the world. They actually used to have pretty good relationships with countries like Pakistan.
So what happened? Well, a lot of it came down to pressure from the United States. The message to its allies was basically boiled down to this really simple idea: good kids don't play with bad kids. And that kind of pressure worked. It forced countries to pick a side, and that just pushed North Korea further and further into isolation.
And what's the philosophy behind all of this? Well, on paper, it's a communist state. But in reality, it's more complicated. The whole system is built on this idea of extreme self-reliance. You can think of it as the country's main software. It's the foundation for all the centralized power and the intense national pride we've been talking about. So when you put it all together, you're left with a pretty big question, right? You've got a state that's basically propped up by two things: fear on the inside and missiles to keep everyone else out. It's a system that has somehow managed to survive for decades. But it makes you wonder, how long can that really last? How long can a state built on just fear and missiles endure?